Well, I was going to say I've never done a pecan before, so I'm not going to be with these pictures at all, because I thought I'd get a clicker. But there was an urban legend that got really popular a few years ago. It was about an architect who designed this university library, and it was absolutely immaculate. It was perfect. But every couple years it sunk a little bit deeper into the ground until eventually it had to be condemned. What happened? He forgot to account for the weight of the books. One of the most rudimentary and basic things, and he forgot about it, and all of his work was for naught. All the time and effort, and all he had was a sunken building that was worth nothing. So when I thought about speaking to 60 people with different professions, different employment situations, I tried to think of something that would apply to everybody, which is difficult because all of our situations are so different. There's really few things that affect each and every one of us, save for one thing, which will cash. Love it or hate it, it's what we have to deal with to survive. Whether we work for ourselves, whether we work for somebody else, we need to properly plan and project our cash flows. And I find it's one of the areas that individuals are almost scared to touch. It's one of the things that people really underplan for, and it hurts their business. 50% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. 50%. And it's not because people aren't passionate about what they're doing. It's not because they aren't good at what they're doing. It's simply that they take some cost and they don't account for it. In my experience, every failure that happens because of cash flow. So what are a few things that could happen with this? Well, first is over-optimistic revenue expectations. Maybe we're all a little bit egotistical, but we start a business and we say, I am better than anybody else. I'm cheaper than everybody else. Why isn't everybody in the valley going to come to me immediately and keep me busy for 40 hours a week? Well, sometimes things are a little bit slower than we might like for them to be, regardless of how good our service is. Sometimes it takes a while to build a brand. It takes a while to get the brand recognition out there, so you might have a lot of dead time, which means you aren't making any money, and thereby you're going to have trouble paying your bills. The flip side of that is expenses. Most people aren't going to forget about a main expense. They're not going to forget that they have rent at the end of the month or that they have a car payment. But there are a lot of small expenses that they either don't account for or really underestimate the amount of cost that there's going to be. A couple examples of those being employees. Most people will account for the salary that they pay an employee, but do they calculate the employer half of FICA taxes, the SUTA and FUTA, the unemployment taxes, workers' compensation, the fact that a lot of times the employers are going to be sitting back and maybe not being productive for them, and that's costing them money too. Auto expenses. We usually account for gas, but do we account for the fact that the more and more we drive, we're having more and more wear and tear on our vehicles, and eventually that's going to come with some kind of a hefty repair? Maybe, maybe not. Utilities. Most people won't forget utilities, but did you know that AEP requires you to have a 3-month deposit when you get the utility switched into your name? That might not sound like much, but I have one client who's in an industrial business. He had to put down $5,000 as soon as he started operations. He planned for it. He was fine. But what if he hadn't? He would have been closing up shop as soon as he started. Same with insurance, just little things that can add up. On a personal side, you've got homeowners and auto. For me, I have to carry $1 million worth of errors and omissions insurance in case I mess up somebody's taxes. You'll have general liability insurance, you'll have workers' comp again, things you want to think about. And we know we're in a really technologically driven world right now. You're going to have to buy a computer, obviously. You're going to have some kind of subscription to different services. And a lot of times in a lot of industries now, you're having to buy a trade-specific software, the license of which is going to cost you several $1,000s. So let's say you account for all of that. You think of every stinking expense down to the penny. You've thought of anything that you know that you're going to spend and anything that could possibly happen, and you're still making more money than you're spending, so you're perfectly fine, right? Wrong. At the worst possible time, something that neither you nor anybody else in the world could have predicted is going to hit. And it's going to be when you don't have any money already. So do you have a buffer for that? Did you have a couple $1,000s for unexpected expenses? If you do, great, you're going to be fine. If you didn't, your business might close up shop. It's a little bit overly harsh, but I like to tell people to do is when you're coming up with a budget or cash flow projection, boost up your projected expenses by 30% and decrease your revenue growth by about 50%. If the business model still makes sense after that, you've got a great idea. If it doesn't, you might want to retool some things. Really, it just comes down to a lot of planning. This is one of the main services I do, and it's one of the ones I really believe in because a couple hours can save you so much pain and suffering later on. And I've talked more about businesses because there's a lot more variables that go into that, but it really doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're thinking about changing jobs, if you're thinking about buying a house, buying a car, buying a wave runner, you want to take into account what might happen and if you're going to have the capital to do it. Or else, some bad things can happen, and that will make you very sad. And really, there's no reason for that because it's something that is so easily avoidable. If you just take the time, you just take the planning that goes into it, then a couple hours of work or a couple $100s worth of planning, and you can avoid losing your house, losing your business, losing all of your investments, and that will make you very happy. Perhaps happy enough to bite off somebody's ear. So really, long story short, I just encourage people to do the planning and do the work that goes into it to avoid any really unfortunate consequences that come if you don't.